At the center of this heartbreaking story were three people: John Reynolds, a former Marine and devoted husband; Emily Reynolds, his caring but often lonely wife; and Father Mark, a charming and mysterious priest. Their once ordinary lives became entangled in lies and tragedy, casting a shadow over the peaceful town of Meadowbrook. On the surface, John and Emily Reynolds seemed like the perfect couple. Married for over a decade, they had built a life marked by stability and respect. John, a decorated ex-Marine, was admired for his discipline and integrity, while Emily, a stay-at-home mum, was loved for her kindness and active participation in community activities. Their seemingly happy marriage was the foundation of their social circle. However, beneath this ideal facade, Emily often felt lonely as John's new job kept him away from home for long hours. As a security consultant for a prestigious company, John frequently traveled for business, leaving Emily to manage the household and care for their two children alone. Though his job was highly respected, it demanded nearly all of his time and energy. Emily's days were marked by the ache of lonely evenings without John. She tried to fill the emptiness by immersing herself in community events and church activities, but the void in her heart only grew. Father Mark, the new priest at St. Mary's Church, was an intriguing figure. His passionate sermons attracted more parishioners each Sunday, and he seemed to have a deep understanding of the struggles and secrets shared with him. His words offered comfort and guidance to those who sought his counsel. Emily found herself increasingly drawn to his magnetic presence, seeking solace in his words and companionship. She began volunteering more at the church, hoping to fill the emptiness left by John's prolonged absences. As John's time away grew longer, Emily's connection with Father Mark deepened, and she began to realize the extent of her feelings for him. Seeing in him a confidant, someone who listened without judgment, their conversations grew more personal, more intense. Father Mark, behind his benevolent exterior, hides his own secrets and ambitions. He sees Emily's vulnerability and seizes the opportunity to draw her closer. The scandal begins with whispers, as it always does. Both scandals due to Meadowbrook being a small town, and secrets being difficult to keep John unaware of the growing closeness between his wife and the priest. Focusing on his demanding job, he took pride in his work, providing security strategies to influential clients, ensuring their safety in a world rife with invisible threats. But he remained unaware of the biggest threat is lurking in his own home. Father Mark has arrived in Meadowbrook as the new parish priest, quickly becoming a beloved figure. His lectures were very passionate. His wise counsel and comforting presence, he had a unique ability to connect with his parishioners, offering guidance and comfort in times of need. Emily was deeply spiritual, bright and actively involved in the church, finds herself drawn to Father Mark's charisma and warmth. The affair between Emily and Father Mark begins innocuously. Emily struggles with feelings of loneliness due to John's frequent absences for long periods of time. Work and community service found solace in the always approachable Father Mark Church, who became her confidant. Their conversations, initially focused on faith and personal struggles, gradually become more personal. Emily feels a connection with the priest that she has never felt with anyone else, felt truly understood and precious. Father Mark was completely captivated by Emily's honesty and vulnerability. He found himself attracted to her, not just as a parishioner but as a woman. Their meetings became more frequent and more private, held in quiet corners. Static of the church, the lines between their roles begin to blur, and an unspoken tension simmers between them. The forbidden nature of a priest falling in love with a married woman creates further tension, frightening danger for every stolen glance and silent conversation. As their relationship develops, they begin to meet outside the church, pretending it is for spiritual guidance. Emily and Father Mark would go on long walks in the countryside, their conversations filled with laughter and shared secrets. Their emotional connection quickly turned physical. Their hands touched. Their lingering touches ignited intense desire. They found themselves in a passionate love affair. Their bodies pressed against each other in the darkness. Their hearts raced with the thrill of forbidden love that the secret meeting brings excitement about what they are doing, crossing sacred boundaries and giving in to the strong attraction between them. The weight of their secret is heavy, the understanding of love. Theirs a constant reminder of the boundaries. They are breaking every touch, every whisper. Every moment alone is filled with the taboo their relationship makes, their forbidden love the more intoxicated they become. The love affair between Emily and Father Mark becomes more and more intense. Consuming their thoughts and actions, they become reckless encounters in more dangerous locations and leave subtle clues hint at their crisis. Emily's behavior begins to change noticeably as she becomes more distant and avoidant of John, her previously steadfast demeanor now marked by restlessness and distraction. Father Mark was affected. His sermons take on a more fervent tone that reflects his inner turmoil as he still struggles with his oath and guilt over his actions. He cannot break off his connection with Emily. The affair brings a sense of excitement and satisfaction that he has never experienced before the initially oblivious John begins to notice changes. Exchange in Emily, her late nights at church, her secret phone calls, and her secret phone calls. The coldness towards him all points to something, remember. His suspicions grow, and he begins to piece together evidence of Emily's betrayal. His world used to be stable and have predictability begins to unravel in the community and begins to whisper. Meadowbrook is a small town where everyone knows each other's business, and the subtle changes in Emily and Father Mark have not gone unnoticed. The rumors spread like wildfire, and the scandalous nature of their relationship became the subject of hushed conversations and speculative glances as the affair continued. Makes it clear that Emily was not the only woman he seduced under the guise of spiritual guidance. Several other women had been attracted to his charms and charisma. Told the stories of themselves about secret meetings and illegal affairs, sheds light on his relationship with Emily, a priest once considered a pillar of the community who is now viewed with suspicion and contempt. The danger grows, and the desperation in Father Mark's actions becomes clear as he seeks to maintain his secret. At any cost, Father Mark is desperate to keep his secret, so he does what that was terrible. David, a regular churchgoer, caught Father Mark and Emily kissing in the confession room. Booth David threatened to tell everyone, unless Father Mark confessed for fear of ruining his perfect image. Father Mark thought, coming up with a dark plan, he tricked David into going to the church's bell tower to talk. It was a quiet, dark night that matched what Father Mark had in mind about the tower, high above and out of the way as they stood next to the edge. David grew more determined, his voice rising with emotion. David saw Father Mark pushing him closer to the edge with one quick and brutal movement. Mark's father pushed him. David's eyes widened when he saw him losing his balance, his arms flailing around, looking for something to grab, but there was nothing. He screamed as he fell down. The sound cut through the seemingly quiet night. It seemed like forever before he hit the ground, the terrible thud of David's body echoing in the night, blood spreading throughout his body. Body bent in strange ways, Father Mark looked down from the tower, his heart pounding as he saw David die. Horrifying, but also relieved that his secret was safe. He quickly went down the tower and made sure no one saw what happened, because they believed he was the only one who dragged David's body to a hidden place in the church's basement. He hid the body under a pile of old church furniture. No one shook hands, but he tried to act normal and pretend like nothing happened. Father Mark kept the masses calm and gathered everyone to notice that David was missing, but there was no body. A mystery. Father Mark comforted everyone who appeared worried while he hid his sins. Time passed and people stopped asking about David. Father Mark continued to act, bringing hope and advice to everyone, but inside he was always worried and afraid of every sudden sound or the darkness he knew. He took a big risk, but he felt he had no choice. Emily didn't know about the deadly lengths Father Mark had gone to continue their affair. She noticed a change. In him, a darkness seemed to envelop him. But he dismissed her worries with a smile, which he tried to make convince himself that he could go on, that he could bury his sins along with David. But the weight of his actions weighs down on him every day, a struggle to maintain his appearance. The police investigation eventually turns cold, with no clues and no suspects to tie Father Mark to the crime. He began to believe he had gotten away with it, and he moved on with his life. But the memory of that night never left him. It haunted his dreams and tainted his every waking moment. He thought he had silenced David, but the torment in his conscience was unrelenting. It was then that the moment Johan feared finally unfolded before his eyes, that his life had been, built on a foundation of trust, of love, and shared dreams with his wife Emily. However, recent times have seen their relationship cast a shadow, as Emily becomes distant way, often lost in thought and often away from home because of doubts. John determined to discover the truth by following Emily one gloomy afternoon. His pursuit led him to St. Mary's Church, where he saw her quietly entering the sanctuary. He snuck inside and hid behind the altar, his heart pounding with anticipation from his hidden vantage point. John watched Emily and Father Mark. She seemed different. Her face radiated a happiness that John hadn't seen in months. Father Mark, who is known for his charismatic and caring nature, stands closer to her than seems appropriate, touching her arm in a way that arouses anger in JN. This sight confirmed his deepest fears. An affair between his wife and the priest they both trusted was engulfed by a mixture of anger and heartbreak John could hold back. As he rushed out from his hiding place behind the altar, shocking both Emily and Father Mark was startled. Emily's face turns pale, while her usually calm Father Mark appears briefly in the volatile and emotional confrontation that follows. John's voice, heavy with betrayal, echoed throughout the church as he accused them, every word weighed with the pain of betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" he shouted, his voice breaking with every word he spoke to us. Emily's family was completely stunned and struggled to say every word. Stammering tears began to well up in John's eyes. That wasn't what you thought she was trying to explain, but the guilt weighed heavily on her words. Her Father Mark intervened to try to calm the escalating situation by raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "John, listen. This wasn't supposed to happen. It's more complicated than you think. It's more complicated than you think." He begged, his voice desperately for John to understand and forgive. But John was consumed by rage, fueled by the betrayal from the two people he loved most. "That complicated? You've betrayed me. I've betrayed everything we stand for," John shouted, his voice seething with anger, his fists clenched, his body shaking with uncontrollable anger. "No." The atmosphere is thick with tension and the situation becomes chaotic. John is consumed by an uncontrollable rage that hurls at Father Mark, the usually peaceful priest forced into a desperate act of self-defense to protect both yourself and dark secrets. They shared. His frantic eyes scanned the area and found a heavy cross near the altar. In a moment of absolute instinct, Father Mark grabbed the cross. The first swing hit John with a terrible thud, opening his forehead and causing blood to spurt from fury-controlled John. Again, but Father Mark was gripped tightly by the terror, swinging the cross with all his might, each blow more brutal than the sound of cracking bones and tearing flesh that eventually splattered on the altar. As Father Mark struck over and over, the sound of the blows echoed through the church. The final crushing blow shattered John's skull, leaving him motionless in a pool of blood, the sacred cross dripping with the blood of Mark's father, his hands shaking, shivering, covered in John's blood and pieces of John's flesh. The floor was slick with crimson, John's body a bloody mess. His face was almost unrecognizable. The force of the blows, the priest stood over his lifeless body, gasping for breath, surrounded by the terrible consequences of his desperate fight for survival. The consequences were painful. Emily witnessed the shocking spiral leading to violence, standing frozen, overcome with terror and grief. Her life once filled with love and a future of hope shattered. She collapsed beside John's body, her cries filling the haunting silence. After the tragic encounter, Father Mark stared at his bloody hands, and his old friend's body felt the full weight of his actions. Panic overcomes him, and he flees, leaving behind a scene of chaos and tragedy. His escape comes not only from the physical location but also from a heavy sense of guilt and looming consequences. From his actions, the quiet night was shattered by the flashing red and blue lights of police cars driving through the town's narrow streets. A distraught and shocked Emily Reynolds called 911, her voice shaking as she told the story. The horrific scene of Father Mark, covered in John's blood, fleeing the scene of the crime, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. The small town that was once his sanctuary now resembles a maze of danger and betrayal. As the first light of dawn touched Meadowbrook, news of John's murder spread quickly, so the police began searching every hallway of the church, and what they found shocked them in a dark corner of the church. Church. Police found David's body in a gruesome manner. They know there are 2 death victims whose fates were sealed at the hands of the same man. This terrible discovery left no doubt that Father Mark, once a respected figure, was now considered a monster, and the police searched everywhere in the church to find clues in every hidden place. No more about the dark secret it holds, and so the hunt begins. All units, we have suspects. On the run, Father Mark is considered armed and approaches the danger with caution. Emergency announcement. Over the police radio, Father Mark moves through the back alleys and hidden streets of the town. His mind races to find a plan that he knows the police will soon follow near. His only chance is to reach the dense woods on the edge of town, where he can lose himself and hope to evade capture by Detective Miller, a well-known seasoned officer. Her relentless pursuit of justice has orchestrated the manhunt. She knows every corner of Meadowbrook and uses her knowledge to predict the movements of Mark's father. Barricades have been erected in all main exits, and police combed the streets and surrounding areas. Mark's father's heart was pounding as he reached the outskirts of town. Dense forest appeared ahead, offering a glimmer of hope. He glanced back, saw police lights flashing in the distance, and heard the whale's faint siren with its last burst of energy. He rushed into the forest, his mind a whirlwind of fear and despair. The forest was dense and confusing. The bushes were tugging at his clothes and slowing his progress. He tripped over roots, trees, and rocks, his breath hitching every time a branch or rustling leaf startled him for fear of the police approaching. The reality of his actions began to weigh heavily on him. His thoughts mixed a chaotic mix of guilt and self-defense. Detective Miller, not far behind her, led a team of officers into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the early morning fog, the scent of pine and wet earth, filling the air mixed with the tension of the chase. The usually peaceful forest now felt like a trap closing in. Father Mark spread out. He couldn't go far. Miller ordered her in a steady and assertive voice. Knowing they were hammering broken branches and disturbed foliage, created a clear trail of dogs trained to track barking and pulling on leashes. Eager to catch the father in the quarry, Mark's strength wanes, growing weaker. As he went deeper into the forest, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, regret, and the terrible crime he had committed. He couldn't help but think of Emily, the woman who had unintentionally caused, given these tragic events. The weight of his guilt becomes unbearable, and he begins to consider one last desperate act to escape. Sudden justice. The barking of police dogs pierces the air. Panic rose in Father Mark as he realized his time was running out. He broke into a desperate sprint, but exhaustion and fear clouded his judgment. He stumbled into a dirt field, empty. Where he met the glare of the police flashlight. "Freeze, place your hand where we can see." Detective Miller's voice rang out firmly and with authority. Father Mark gasped, and as defeat raised his bloody hands, he fell to his knees. The weight of his actions crushed him. The officers quickly surrounded him and tied him with handcuffs as they led him away. He felt needles, the cold kind that bites his wrist, a physical manifestation of his sin in a moment of despair. Father Mark made a desperate attempt to take his own life when the officers were distracted, rushing towards a jagged rock trying to end his life. However, to his distress, the officers quickly reacted, pulling him back and restraining him tighter, his failed suicide attempt only adding to his suffering. As the sun rising entirely above Meadowbrook, the once serene town has now witnessed the dramatic arrest of fallen priest Father Mark, leading his fate to be sealed by his own dark actions. The manhunt is over, but the scars left on the community will last for years to come. Father Mark is imprisoned in his mind. His blur of remorse and despair was Swift's trial, convincing evidence that he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he sat in his prison cell, the reality of his plight behind bars and concrete walls was a constant reminder of his sins and the life he ruined in prison. Father Mark faces daily torment of conscience. His efforts to find redemption are met with cold reality, curious about his actions. The other prisoners' whispers of isolation and the realization of the pain he has caused weigh on him. He has tried to escape justice, But now he will spend the rest of his life facing the Meadowbrook community slowly begins to heal, but the memory of Father Mark's betrayal and the tragic events that followed remain etched in their minds. The church that once served as a place of comfort now stands as a reminder of the darkness that had briefly enveloped their town. And so, Father Mark had to serve a life sentence haunted by the ghosts of his past failed escape attempt. A constant reminder of his inescapable sin, John can imagine the depth of betrayal that awaits him, as Emily's search for solace is destined to end in tragedy. And what happens to Father Mark, whose dark secrets and desperate actions have torn a community apart? How will Meadowbrook heal from such profound devastation? Thank you for exploring this harrowing story with us. Click here for another true crime story.